Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Have you ever found yourself stuck in a situation where you were forced into a choice, even though it wasn't what you wanted? That was the reality for a young man named Mark Davis. Now, let's return to Mark's journey and see where this unexpected contract takes him. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Have you ever found yourself stuck in a situation where you were forced into a choice, even though it wasn't what you wanted? That was the reality for a young man named Mark Davis. Now, let's return to Mark's journey and see where this unexpected contract takes him. The next few days passed in a blur for Mark. The weight of his decision felt heavier with each passing hour. Eleanor's offer still echoed in his mind, like a constant reminder of the choices he had made. He had always believed in doing the right thing, in following the path of integrity. But now, it seemed that path was blocked by the overwhelming burden of his family's debt, his future slipping through his fingers. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Eleanor: "Meet me at the office tomorrow. We'll finalize everything." Mark stared at the screen for a long moment, uncertainty swirling in his stomach. But he had no choice. His father's debts loomed over him like a dark cloud, and this was the only way to free himself from them. The following evening, Mark found himself once again stepping into the sleek, modern lobby of Eleanor's corporate building. The polished floors and glass walls were a stark contrast to the dimly lit cafe where they first met. It felt surreal, like he had stepped into another world, one where his struggles didn't matter, where wealth and power dominated. He was led upstairs by a young assistant to a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's skyline. Eleanor was already seated behind a large desk, her demeanor as cool and composed as ever. She handed him a thick contract, the words blurring together as Mark glanced at the first few pages. He could barely focus on the fine print, the letters swimming in his vision. But there it was, his future, spelled out on paper. He wasn't sure if this was the right thing, but at this point, it felt like the only thing. He signed his name, the ink feeling heavier than ever. The deal was done. Eleanor's lawyer handed him a document confirming the arrangement, and just like that, Mark Davis was married, not in a traditional sense, but in a way that would change the course of his life forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Eleanor's world was fast-paced, full of meetings, gala events, and high-end social gatherings. Mark, a man who had spent most of his life in humble surroundings, found himself thrown into a life of luxury and excess. He was introduced as Eleanor's husband, though there was no real affection between them, just two people bound by a contract. At first, Mark felt like an imposter, as though he didn't belong in the circles he was now forced to navigate. The glitzy parties, the polished peaplight was all so far removed from the life he had known. But as the days passed, he began to notice things about Eleanor that he hadn't seen before. Beneath her sharp exterior, there was a loneliness, a vulnerability that she tried to hide. She was always in control, always composed, but when they were alone, there were fleeting moments when her guard slipped. And in those moments, Mark couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward her, a connection he hadn't expected. One evening, they attended a charity gala in the city's grandest ballroom. Eleanor was the center of attention, as always, effortlessly charming the crowd with her beauty and poise. Mark, on the other hand, stood at her side, feeling out of place among the high society that surrounded them. He had never felt more like an outsider in his life. Eleanor turned to him with a smile as they mingled with guests. You look like you're about to run away, she teased, her voice low so only he could hear. Mark chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm not used to this world, he admitted, his gaze drifting across the room. I feel like I don't belong here. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her smile faltering for a moment. You belong here as much as anyone else. She paused, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. But I think you're more than capable of handling this world, Mark. I never doubted that you would adjust. Her words, though meant to reassure him, only deepened the sense of confusion that had been building inside him. Eleanor had put him in this position, yet she seemed to want him to fit in, to be a part of her world. But why? Was it just for show? Or was there something more beneath the surface? Later that night, as they returned to their penthouse, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. The contract that had once seemed so simple, so clean, now felt more complicated. He wasn't sure if he was falling for her, but he knew that this arrangement, this marriage built on paper, was beginning to feel like it might be something more. And as the days passed, Mark found himself questioning everything: his decision, his feelings for Eleanor, and what it meant to truly be bound to someone. Was this just a contract, or was he starting to fall for the woman he had promised to marry in name only? The days after the gala felt like a blur to Mark. His life, which had already been so chaotic, now seemed to spiral in new directions. The tension between him and Eleanor grew as he found himself questioning everything: the marriage, the contract, and most of all, his feelings for her. The woman who had once seemed so distant, so unattainable, was now someone he couldn't stop thinking about. But what was he really feeling? Was it just loneliness, or was it something more? It wasn't just the physical attraction that had him questioning things, it was the moments he started to notice, the tiny glimpses of vulnerability that Eleanor revealed when she thought no one was looking. He had seen her at the gala, surrounded by her business associates and high society friends, holding the room together like a seasoned diplomat. But later, as they left the event, he saw something different in her. She wasn't the same woman who had commanded attention all night. Instead, she was quieter, more withdrawn, as though the weight of her world was finally too much to bear. They walked back to their penthouse in silence. The city lights flickered below, casting a golden glow over the streets. Mark couldn't help but glance at Eleanor as she walked ahead, her posture as perfect as ever, but there was something in her step, something that didn't match the confident persona she put on for the world. The woman who had seemed so sure of herself now appeared to carry a burden he had never imagined. He wanted to ask her what was really going on behind that composed facade, but he hesitated. Was he crossing a line? Could he be more than just the husband in a business deal? Or was he just fooling himself? Later that night, after a long day of meetings and charity events, Mark sat on the couch in their living room, the soft hum of the city below filling the silence between them. Eleanor had excused herself to her study, as she always did after their public appearances. Mark found himself staring out the large windows, feeling the weight of the world settling on his shoulders. He had agreed to this contract, this marriage, for financial stability, for the sake of his family. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. He was beginning to wonder if the life he had thought he was building with Eleanor was more than just a contract. Could this be real? Could he really fall in love with her? The sound of footsteps behind him broke his thoughts. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching him silently for a moment. She was dressed in a simple black robe, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. For the first time, she looked human. Not the powerful CEO or the perfect businesswoman. Just a woman, tired and vulnerable. "Mark," she said softly, her voice lacking its usual firmness. He turned to face her, surprised by the shift in her tone. "You've been quiet all evening. What's on your mind?" Mark opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? That he was confused? That he didn't know what he was feeling? That he was starting to think he wasn't just in this for the money anymore? Instead, he said the first thing that came to mind, "I'm just trying to figure it all out." Eleanor walked over and sat down next to him. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there quietly, her presence oddly comforting. After a long pause, she spoke again, this time her words more candid than Mark had expected. "I know this is hard, Mark," she said, her voice low and almost apologetic. "I never intended for it to be this complicated. This was supposed to be straightforward, just a deal between two people who needed something from each other." But now, she trailed off, looking down at her hands, almost as though she were ashamed. Mark didn't know how to respond. He had always known this was just a business arrangement, something that made sense on paper. But now, seeing her so raw, so vulnerable, it made him question everything he had thought he understood about their situation. Was it just business? Or was there something deeper? Eleanor took a deep breath, then turned her gaze back to him. "I didn't want to admit it, but I think I've started to depend on you. I know that sounds ridiculous, considering everything. But I've been alone for so long, and this marriage, even if it was supposed to be a contract, it's starting to mean something to me." Mark was silent for a long time. His heart raced in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. He had always believed in doing what was right, but now, he wasn't so sure anymore. Could this really be just a business arrangement? Or had their lives become tangled in ways they hadn't expected? He finally found his voice, his words coming out quieter than he intended. "Eleanor. I don't know what I'm feeling, but I think I'm starting to care about you. And I'm not sure if that's just me being lonely, or if it's something more." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the truth. And in that moment, Mark realized that this was no longer just about a contract. He had already crossed a line. The question now was whether he could handle the consequences. They sat there for a while longer, neither of them speaking, as the city lights continued to flicker in the distance. The contract they had signed had started as a simple business deal. But somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something far more complicated, a bond neither of them had anticipated, and as Mark sat there, with Eleanor beside him, he couldn't help but wonder how much of this was fate, and how much was just the inevitable result of two people trying to build a life together, even when they weren't sure what they really wanted. The days that followed were filled with tension. Mark and Eleanor were still living under the same roof, still following the script they had written for their marriage, but something had shifted. It wasn't just the occasional moments of tenderness that made them both feel uncomfortable. It was the constant undercurrent of something more. Neither of them said it, but both of them felt it. The connection that had started as a business arrangement was becoming something deeper. Mark spent the next few days trying to bury his emotions, focusing on the work that Eleanor had given him to do. She was still as composed as ever, running her empire with precision, while he did what he could to fit into the life she had built. But the more he tried to keep his distance, the more he found himself drawn to her. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way her vulnerability peeked through the cracks in her armor, that made him want to know her better. One evening, after a particularly long day of business meetings, Mark found himself sitting alone in the living room, nursing a drink. He heard the sound of Eleanor's footsteps as she entered the room, her silhouette casting a shadow on the floor. She was dressed in a black dress that clung to her figure, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Mark couldn't help but watch her as she walked across the room, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "You're still awake," she said, her voice soft but steady. Mark didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. Instead, he simply nodded. He had always known that Eleanor was a powerful woman, but now, he could see just how much she had sacrificed to build her empire. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a woman who had faced her own struggles, and that made him admire her even more. Eleanor sat down next to him, not saying anything at first. The silence between them was heavy, but there was no tension, just a quiet understanding that neither of them had the words to express what they were both feeling. "Mark," Eleanor said, her voice breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night. About how this marriage feels like it's becoming something more. I don't know what to make of it, but I can't ignore it." Mark turned to her, his heart racing. This was the moment he had been dreading, had been trying to push his feelings away, trying to tell himself that this was just business, that nothing real could come from this marriage. But now, with Eleanor sitting so close, looking at him with a vulnerability he had never seen before, he knew he couldn't deny it any longer. "I feel the same way," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to ignore it, but I can't." Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked at him, and for a brief moment, it felt as though everything around them faded away. The city lights outside, the luxury of their penthouse site all felt distant, irrelevant, as if the only thing that mattered in that moment was the connection they were sharing. "I never expected this," Eleanor said quietly. "I never thought I would be in a situation like this, married to someone I barely knew, someone who was just supposed to be a partner in name. But now it feels like I've opened myself up to something I didn't plan for." Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. "I didn't plan for it either," he admitted. "But I can't keep pretending that this is just a contract. I don't want to." The words hung in the air between them, charged with the intensity of what they were both feeling but not yet fully understanding. Eleanor looked at him, her gaze intense but searching, as if trying to figure out what to do next. "What does this mean for us?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Mark swallowed hard. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't have all the answers. But one thing was clear: their relationship had changed. It was no longer just a business arrangement. They were beginning to care for each other, in a way that neither of them had expected, and neither of them knew how to navigate. For the first time since their marriage had begun, Mark felt the weight of the decision he had made, not as a burden, but as an opportunity to build something real. Whether or not they were ready for it, he didn't know. But he was willing to try. They both were. Eleanor's lips curved into a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "I don't know what happens next," she said softly. "But I think we should figure it out together." Mark nodded, his heart lifting slightly at her words. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone in this. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: the life he had signed up for was no longer just about money or business. It was about something deeper, something more complicated, something worth fighting for. And as he sat there next to Eleanor, he realized that this marriage, built on paper and broken rules, was slowly becoming something more than either of them could have ever imagined. The next few days felt different for Mark and Eleanor. The air between them had shifted, the unspoken tension now mixed with something else, something neither of them had expected. After the conversation they'd had that night, Mark found himself thinking more and more about Eleanor, about the woman she truly was, not just the powerful CEO he had first met. The walls she had built around herself, the perfect facade she wore in front of the world, had started to crack, revealing a side of her he hadn't seen before. And he couldn't help but wonder if he was starting to fall for her. He knew it wasn't supposed to happen like this, not in a marriage built on paper and broken rules, but it was happening anyway. He had tried to deny it, but he couldn't ignore his feelings. He wanted to be close to her, to know her more deeply. And he wasn't sure if she felt the same. As for Eleanor, she had become quieter in the days following their conversation. Mark noticed the way she would sometimes stare out the window, lost in thought, as though carrying the weight of her own inner conflict. She had built her empire, kept control of everything in her life, but now, with Mark, things were different. She didn't know what this was between them, but she knew one thing for sure: it wasn't just a contract anymore. She had never expected to find herself in this position, to begin questioning her emotions in a relationship that had started out so cold, so calculated. But now, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when she couldn't ignore the growing feelings that had taken root. And she didn't know what to do with them. It was late one evening when Eleanor came to Mark, interrupting his thoughts. He had been sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, his mind a whirlpool of confusion and emotion. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the living room, her posture rigid, her eyes searching. "Mark," she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. "We need to talk." Mark turned toward her, his heart skipping a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, unsure of what it would bring. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Eleanor walked into the room and sat down beside him. There was a distance between them, but it felt different now, like the space between them was filled with something unsaid, something they both felt but couldn't yet express. I've been thinking about what we talked about, Eleanor began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. About this, marriage. About us. I don't know what to make of it, Mark. But I can't ignore how much it's started to matter to me. You matter to me. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had been wondering if she felt the same way, but hearing her say it aloud wasn't sure what to do with that. Eleanor, he started, his voice faltering for the first time in a long while, I didn't expect any of this either. I didn't expect to feel this way about you. I thought this would be temporary, something I could walk away from when the time came. But now I'm not sure I can walk away. Eleanor's eyes softened, her lips curling into a small, tentative smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but one of uncertainty, of hope. I know, she said quietly. I didn't want this to get complicated. But it has. And I don't know if we can just keep pretending it's not. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over him. The truth was, he didn't want to pretend anymore. He didn't want to hide from the fact that he cared for her, that this marriage had become something real. He didn't know how they could move forward, but he was willing to try. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was no longer just surviving, was living. And he wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he wanted to face it with her. So what do we do now? Mark asked, his voice filled with the uncertainty that both of them felt. Eleanor's gaze shifted, her mind racing as she tried to find the right words. We take it one step at a time, she said, her voice firm but filled with the vulnerability she had been hiding. We stop pretending this is just a contract. We figure out what this is. Together. Mark looked at her, searching her face for any signs of doubt, but all he saw was the same quiet determination he had come to respect. He nodded slowly, a weight lifting off his shoulders. This wasn't just about the marriage anymore. This was about them, about figuring out how to be more than just two people bound by a contract. It was about taking a chance on something they had both been afraid to admit, that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. The moment hung in the air between them, heavy with promise. For the first time, Mark felt like he was on the edge of something worth fighting for. And as Eleanor reached out and placed her hand over his, he knew that this was the beginning of something new, something that had the potential to change everything. Noi dung chwin thun a with circumflexem ton noi dung chwin thun a with circumflexem ton. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of clarity. Mark and Eleanor no longer felt like strangers who were simply bound by a contract. They had become something more, something real. As they navigated the complexities of their relationship, they were both learning to embrace the truth of what they had together, despite the unusual way it had started. The moments of doubt still crept in, but they were fewer, replaced by laughter, shared looks, and the quiet understanding that had begun to blossom between them. One afternoon, as Mark sat in the study, going through some paperwork, Eleanor walked in, her presence filling the room. She had always been a commanding figure, but now, there was a softness in her demeanor, something she rarely allowed the world to see. Mark looked up from his work, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the way she was looking at him. She was standing there, just watching him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. I've been thinking about something, she said, her voice a little hesitant, but still strong. About what comes next. About us. Mark put the papers down, his full attention on her. He had learned that when Eleanor spoke this way, it was important to listen. What do you mean? He asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. She walked toward him, her steps slow but purposeful, and sat down next to him. I know we've made it this far, and it hasn't been easy. We've been figuring things out, one day at a time. But I think it's time we stop pretending. Stop pretending that this marriage was just some arrangement. I think we both know it's something more now. Mark's heart fluttered at her words. He had known this for a while, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real. I've been thinking the same thing, he confessed, his voice a little shaky, but honest. I never thought I would end up here, with you. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else. Eleanor's eyes softened, and she reached out to gently take his hand. For a brief moment, the world outside their penthouse seemed to disappear, and all that was left was the quiet intimacy between them. I don't know what happens next, she said quietly. But I think I want to find out with you. Together. Mark nodded, his chest swelling with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. He had spent so much time trying to protect himself from getting hurt, but now, with Eleanor sitting beside him, he knew he wasn't alone. He wasn't just surviving anymore, was living. And he wanted to live this life with her. Together, he whispered, the word tasting like a promise. A promise they would both have to keep, no matter what obstacles came their way. Eleanor smiled, her expression full of warmth and affection. For the first time in a long time, Mark saw the woman he had been longing to know, the woman who had been hidden behind the walls of her carefully constructed persona. And he knew, in that moment, that he wasn't just a man caught in a business arrangement. He was someone who had found something worth fighting for. The future wasn't clear, and there were still uncertainties that lay ahead. But Mark and Eleanor were no longer afraid of what might come. They had chosen to walk this path together, not out of obligation, but because they had discovered something real, something neither of them had expected. And in that quiet moment, as they sat side by side, hands entwined, Mark realized that what had started as a business arrangement had transformed into something deeper, a love that neither of them had seen coming, but one they were both ready to embrace. With each passing day, they were writing a new chapter in their lives, one that was no longer bound by rules or contracts, but by the choices they made together. And for the first time, Mark felt truly free. As the weeks went by, Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to grow stronger. What had begun as a business arrangement, a marriage forged out of necessity, was now something entirely different. They had become partners in every sense of the word. They supported each other, confided in each other, and shared their dreams and fears. Their connection, once tentative and uncertain, was now solid and real. Mark had learned so much about Eleanor over the past few months. He had seen the layers of strength and vulnerability that made up the woman he had come to love. She wasn't just the powerful CEO he had first met. She was someone who had built her empire from the ground up, someone who carried the weight of her success, but also the weight of loneliness. Mark understood now that she had always pushed people away, afraid of getting hurt, but with him, she had started to let down her guard. Eleanor, in turn, had come to see Mark in a new light. He was no longer the man she had married out of necessity. He had become someone she trusted, someone she could lean on. His sincerity, his kindness, and his quiet strength had captured her heart in ways she never expected. She had always been so focused on her career, on building her legacy, but Mark had shown her that there was more to life than success and power. There was love, companionship, and the kind of partnership that made everything worthwhile. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below, Eleanor turned to Mark with a thoughtful look in her eyes. "You know, I never thought I'd find someone like you," she said softly. Mark glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "And what kind of person is that?" he asked, his voice warm. Eleanor paused for a moment, searching for the right words. "Someone who sees me for who I really am. Not just the CEO or the businesswoman. But me, the woman behind all of this. And I never thought I would need that. But now. I can't imagine my life without it." Mark reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to imagine it," he said quietly. "Because I'm not going anywhere. We've built something real together, Eleanor. Something worth holding on to." Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked at him, the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long now on full display. "I never thought I would say this, but I love you, Mark," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," Mark replied, his heart swelling with the truth of his words. "I always have." In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. The contract, the doubts, the uncertainty, none of it mattered anymore. They had found something that neither of them had expected, a love that was real, that was theirs. And as they sat there together, hand in hand, the future no longer seemed uncertain. They had faced their fears, their doubts, and their insecurities, and they had come out stronger on the other side. The journey they had started together, as two strangers bound by a contract, had transformed into something beautiful, something neither of them could have imagined. It wasn't just about the money, the legacy, or the business deal anymore. It was about the love they had found in each other, the kind of love that made everything else seem small in comparison. And as Mark kissed Eleanor gently on the forehead, he knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As a team. As partners. And most importantly, as two people who had found a love worth fighting for. Their story, once built on paper, was now a story of real love. And it was just beginning.